Instead of the gospel, I'm going to read Psalm 30, which is one of the alternative psalms for this particular Sunday. So Psalm 30. I will extol you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up and did not let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord my God, I cried to you for help, and you have healed me. O Lord, you brought me up my soul from Sheol and restored me to life among those gone down to the pit. Sing praises to the Lord, O you faithful ones, and give thanks to his holy name. For his anger is but a moment, but his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may linger for a night, but joy comes in the morning. As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved. By your favor, O Lord, you have established me as a strong mountain. You hid your face, and I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I cried, and to the Lord I made supplication. Here ends the lesson for the day. Please be seated. It has been amazing to me over the years how some of the learning disciplines, particularly sociology, psychology, and psychiatry, have often come up with certain ideas and certain methods of treatment that they think are so new and so unusual and so great. And we look back in Scripture or some of the old classics of writing and see that they have been around for thousands of years. Nothing really new has been discovered. I had a lesson that I read from another pastor this last week, and it applies to so many things and so many people. I wanted to use it this morning, and I can use an illustration of somebody not associated with the congregation. One of the things that he said in his counseling is that he ran across all kinds of people who had different kinds of treatment. And he was talking about a woman that he had had in for the past week, and she was, we'll call her Anna. She had been married for 30 years, and all of a sudden her husband up and left her for another woman. She went into, as people often do in that kind of a situation, went into depression, a lot of anger, and a lot of illogical behavior. And then, as so many people do when they have a trauma in their life, they begin to cast doubt about themselves. I'm no good. I'll never find another person who loves me. It's all my fault. I goofed up. I'm terrible. And he said, so we had to put her in the therapy. Said none of these things, none of these accusations that she made about herself had any concrete basis in fact. She was a very good person. He said what she was introduced to was a new treatment, he said, called cognitive behavior therapy. Cognitive behavior therapy. It's a psychotherapy where patients are to approach their problems with critical thinking skills. Now, isn't that unusual? To attack your problems with critical thinking skills. So they are attempting to meet these self-destructive things they say about themselves or do to themselves by working with a therapist and get rid of what they call the cognitive distortions, which to you and I would be illogical thinking wrong things. She said she had received a lot of help from this cognitive behavior therapy because one of the things she had done is she had gone into volunteer teaching to kind of spend the time that she had available now to herself. And she wanted to do something for somebody else. But as soon as she started teaching, she began to beat herself up for the way she was teaching. She was comparing herself with a lifelong teacher who was one of the great teachers in the school, and I always thought she was doing such a poor job. And in the process of her therapy, the therapist asked her to begin to talk about the things that she did, and found out that there were many things that she was doing that were better than a teacher who had been there for many years. It was a new idea, a new way of operating that she brought to the situation, which proved to be highly successful. He did this with all the things that she said about herself and all the practices that she tried to do to restore some kind of psychic balance. And she said finally that I'm no longer sweeping, it's not that I no longer have sweeping negative thoughts, but I am no longer a victim of them. I no longer hold on to them. I make good judgments about what I do and find out that there is so much positive in what I do, and she is on her way to restored health. This cognitive behavior therapy is being used in treating anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders, depression, perfectionism, chronic fatigue, and stuttering. But I'm not here this morning to sell you on cognitive behavior therapy. After all, our text is the Bible. But it is kind of interesting that when we did Psalm 30, which is one of the psalms that is recommended for the day, the psalmist, not familiar with cognitive behavior therapy, uses many of its same principles. We all know people who are balanced, very much balanced. And they've learned to deal with these cognitive distortions and recognize them for what they are. They're just illogical thinking, mental spins that we make about ourselves, where we tend to blame others to some great degree rather than ourselves, to make honest evaluations, but sometimes getting into the dirt of our lives and thinking that we have no value whatsoever. The psalmist, and this is David, who has done some pretty terrible things. And he is trying to find restoration in his relationship with God. And he said, "You are indeed my rock and my fortress, and your name's sake lead me and guide me." He said, "O Lord, you brought up my hole from Sheol, from the depths." But then he begins to talk about God's reaction to him and what he's done. And he says, "Your anger is for a moment, but your favor is for a lifetime." Your anger is for a moment, but your favor is for a lifetime. This contrasted with when David was writing the 51st Psalm, where he saw himself as totally depraved and someone who deserved nothing but God's absence from his life. He says, "Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes in the morning." And he gives the praise to God. "O God, I cried to you for help, and you healed me. Not only did you heal me physically, but you healed me emotionally and spiritually. And even though I strayed far from your paths, I know that restoration is possible. It is not only possible, but you have made me one with you again." The problem that we have with illogical thinking or cognitive dissonance is when we start looking back at ourselves and thinking that we're so bad that God can't help us. We have done something bad 10, 20, 40 years ago and feel that God will never forgive, and that there is no place for us in a relationship with God. We spend the rest of our life delving in something that can't be changed, except what can be changed is the way we respond to it and understand that God forgives and leads you and restores you to a new life. It is not only the psalmist that has understood this principle of right thinking, but also the Apostle Paul. For in his letter to the Romans, the 2nd chapter, the 2nd verse, he says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern the will of God." Now really listen to that again, because it is really, really very important in terms of our spiritual life. Do not be conformed to this world by looking at yourself and judging you by all kinds of things that say you're not what you're supposed to be and that you're some terrible, depraved creature apart from God. But let the renewing of your mind, straight thinking, restore you so you understand the will of God. Good, concrete thinking helps you to understand God's forgiveness and God's purpose in your life. We meet a lot of things in life that really throw us for a loop. A diagnosis in terms of our health, broken relationships that destroy relationships that have been for a long time. And we begin to say for ourselves, life is always going to be like this. I'll always feel this way. God is not on my side. God is letting me go to pieces. The psalmist says, the morning comes. But that morning comes, that joy of morning comes after a dark night. And there is not one of us here who has not walked through a dark night. But a commitment to Jesus Christ and His glory and His resurrection helps you to understand that beyond the dark night, there is joy in the morning. And kudos to those who have walked through the dark night, or even at this point are walking through some very dark nights. I recently had communion for someone who is going to pass very soon. And in the midst of her suffering, in the midst of the realization that there is going to be no healing in that case, and a resignation, the time is very, very, very short. That person looked at me and said, "The grace of God is so good. I am so blessed. I have had such a good life. And now the praise of God's grace is going to be seen in its fullness, because soon I will be returning home." There is one act that we used in one of the communion services when I actually was on internship, and I thought it was kind of neat, and I don't know why I've never practiced it since that time. What we asked the congregation to do on a communion Sunday was for everybody who was suffering from something about themselves that they really didn't like, or that they were really having trouble with, things that they were having trouble accepting, to write them on a piece of paper. And when they come forward to the communion table, we had a wastebasket there that they just could take that piece of paper, crumple it up, and throw it away, and say, "From now on, I understand God's grace, and even so, even if it is a dark night, there will be joy in my morning, because God has promised it." I thought this was kind of foolish when the senior pastor suggested it to me. Some kind of hokum. And I was amazed at how many people responded to that and say, I needed something concrete like that, where I could take those things that were bothering me and write them on something and throw them away. Throw them away from my person, because that symbolized a release in my mind that I think is going to make me whole again. Oh, the Apostle Paul had cognitive dissonance. He said, "I know nothing good dwells within me, Well, we know that isn't true. We know that there are good things that come from you. But Paul clarified it. He said, but God dwells within me. On my own, I can probably do nothing. But with God's grace, I can do everything. That's correct thinking. That's cognitive behavior therapy. Maybe by myself I can't do much. But with God's help, I can do all things. And then he concludes it by saying, there is no condemnation in Jesus Christ. Only acceptance and personal salvation. Amen.